this computer. So again, welcome, Mike. So thank you so much for taking the time out to be with us today. I know you have a busy schedule, but hopefully this will be as fun for you as it is for us. We're covering data analysis in this class, so a lot of what we talk about is spreadsheets. We're working with Excel, and because this traditionally is a business class, I try to get the students exposed to roles that are involved with data, in case somebody has an interest in them. I know with my background, when I was an undergraduate, I had no interest in doing anything with data. And little did I know that I would wind up spending a good part of my career working with data. And now I'm teaching it. So who knew? But so I wanted to, encourage people to, have fun with it and explore it. And so after this interview, our students are going to be going out and interviewing somebody else who may work with data in their careers. And so this is sort of like an example of what the interview might look like. So I'll let you, Mike, I'll let you tell a little bit more about yourself in just a second, but Mike is, he joined Deloitte in 1991, and he has over 30 years of actuarial experience, and he's currently the National Property and Casualty Actuarial Leader. And prior to those roles, Mike has served as the leader of the firm's actuarial and insurance solutions practice in US India, which I didn't know that, for 5 years, and the leader of the Deloitte human capital practice in India for 2 years. So it might be interested to hear a little bit about your experience there. So one of the reasons why we wanted to interview Mike was because I always show this top 20 jobs, business jobs, and every year Actuary comes out in the top 20. I think one year, maybe last year, was maybe the #1 role. I just looked up U.S. News and World Reports for 2021, and Actuary is still on the list, but I think it moved down to 16. But the median salary went up. So, I don't know, however they rank these things. If you're in the top 20, 25, I think that's probably a good example. So students have been asking us, so what is an actuary? What do they actually do? And I said, well, I happen to know an actuary. I used to work with actuaries when I was at Deloitte back in Chicago. But I never knew exactly what actuaries do, and so I'm just as curious as the students are about learning a little bit more about what you do, Mike. And I have somewhat of a better idea, but we sort of worked in the same practice, but we never necessarily interacted. At least when I was in Chicago. Now I did when I moved back out to Los Angeles and was doing some predictive analytics work. I got connected with some actuaries, Peter Wu and some other folks out in the West to do some predictive analytics work for some clients. So we were experimenting with it back then. So I did get a chance to interact, and we actually had a lot more in common than I thought. So anyway, this was the building that we worked in Chicago. It was this little pointy one here with the spike on top. So this is a picture we used to. You guys have moved since then, right? You moved your.
Yeah, I wish we were still there, but yeah, we moved to the other side of the loop. So.
Yeah. You're right in the kind of in the financial area. Yeah, we had a night. I actually had my office was somewhere. What were we, like on the 37th floor?
Yeah,
37th floor, and I watched them build down here. They were building the Millennium Park and the bandstand there. It was pretty amazing. So Those are good times.
Indeed.
I'm not going to make you tell us about this paper, but Mike has just published this work here, and I actually I read through the first page. It looks kind of interesting, and then I saw that it was an 88-page paper, so I didn't get a chance to. I skimmed the rest of it, the document. So congratulations on your paper.
Thank you. Thank you.
So that's it. So Mike, I thought maybe you could just tell me a little bit about your role, what you do at Deloitte, and then I'll let some of the students ask some questions of you as well. So maybe you could just give me a little bit about what what your role is, and give me some where you are right now, and what you're doing.
Okay, so yeah, as Paul mentioned, I'm a partner out of Chicago for Deloitte, and I focus on what I would call core reserving work. And so let me step back and talk a few minutes about the actuarial profession in general. So there are 4 types of actuaries. There's life actuaries. They deal with, not surprisingly, life insurance, annuities, things like that. There's health actuaries that deal with, again, health insurance. There's pension actuaries that deal with pensions. There aren't a lot of formal pensions around anymore, but probably more so in the public sector than anywhere else. And then there's property and casualty actuaries, which pretty much covers everything else, right? Actuaries deal with measuring and helping organizations manage risk, insurable type risk. So my role is to work with organizations to either develop an ultimate expectation of what their risk is, and then how much money to set aside to pay those potential claims, and then to work with them to develop strategies around how to mitigate that risk. So from that perspective, I work with, not surprisingly, a lot of insurance companies. Berkshire Hathaway is one of my clients. The Hartford, CNA would be some of my larger clients. But I also have, from an insurance company perspective, but I've also worked with companies like Walmart, Target, General Motors, just starting to work with GE. So those are just some names of the clients that I work with. Now, what we do is we price insurance. So we look at look at history and what the ultimate costs are related to claims that come in. So like your auto insurance, for example. How much does it cost? You're paying premiums every 6 months for your auto insurance. How is that derived? Well, the actuaries derive that premium, and they derive it by looking at historical costs and adjusting for inflation, adjusting for driving trends, things like that. And they ultimately develop what the ultimate premium is going to be, which then you charge. So that's one type of project that I might be involved with. And then there's also, they write those policies, and then the insurance company says, okay, well, I've written 1,000 of those auto policies. How much do I need to set aside of all that premium dollars to pay the ultimate claims that are going to come in? Because not everyone's going to have a claim. Some, you might see one claim for every 1,000 drivers. So we help companies determine the reserve amounts to set aside to pay those claims at some point into the future.
Okay. So what kind of data, like just following on the car insurance example that you gave, what kind of data do the actuaries look at? What do they use to make decisions? What kind of variables?
Yeah. So I'll start from the pricing perspective. So they're going to look at individual demographics. They're going to look at age. age matters. So a young male driver is more likely to be in an accident than a middle-aged female driver, for example. But how much worse? So that's, the actuary is going through and sifting through the data, and they pull in all sorts of, historical data of how many claims have, 16-year-old boys, had relative to the number of policies that were written, looked at that relative to somebody who's, say, 40 and female, and, come up with relativities. And so if you come up with an overall rate that you have, then you can disperse that based upon the relativity that you see on the historical data between that 16-year-old and that 40-year-old. Now, age and gender are two parameters, but when you think about it from a broader pricing perspective, there's a wide variety of variables you could look at. Some are socially acceptable, some are not socially acceptable. And I'll give you an example that race might be a variable that might be predictive, but that's not socially acceptable, right? And so, and that's because you'd be disadvantaging people of color if that indeed showed them as having a worse accident rate. So that's, state legislators, state insurance departments would not allow you to use that. But there are indicators that can be quite predictive, and age is one of them, gender is one of them. But it's surprising what the most powerful predictor is, and this gets back to people like Paul mentioned him, the Peter Wu. So Peter was a predictive analytics expert. He was the expert in our practice. He actually helped start the predictive analytics practice, which is part of the actuarial practice in our firm now about 20 years ago. And, I guess I would ask people on the phone, what's the most powerful predictor for the cost of your the likelihood of getting in an accident from a personal auto insurance? Is it gender? Is it age? As you think through, what might be the most powerful predictor.
What do you guys think?
Silence.
What?
Age.
Age is powerful. I mean, that's why I mentioned age. Gender also matters. 16-year-old, male is more likely to be in an accident than the 16-year-old female. The most powerful predictor of personal auto insurance is your credit score. So if you have bad credit, you're likely going to be charged more than somebody exactly like you that has good credit, because it's been demonstrated that people with bad credit scores have a worse driving experience. And something that you just wouldn't think would be, that would make sense, but it's a matter of taking 1,000 different variables you could look at and looking at, it's the correlation between those variables and, the cost of the accident and in the portfolio you've got. And then, it's not causal, but it is correlated. And so when you look at that, that proves out to be the most powerful score. And it's also interesting. You can translate that even into the business, into like general liability for businesses. If you were, what the most powerful predictor of losses is going to be a company's FICO score. So if you had two flower shops across the street from each other, and they looked exactly the same, whoever has the worst FICO score, which is similar to a credit score for us, is more likely to have claims than the other flower store. And so companies, particularly insurance companies that do a lot of pricing of experience, look at these and they put them in the rate structure. And that's how, and those are the types of things that they've identified as looking at it. And it's part of a broad-based formula that probably includes, I don't know, it could be like theoretically 300 variables, but most of them are pretty minor in influence, and they really try to limit it to maybe 20, 25 variables. But all those different things go into the into the pricing of the policy.
Okay, interesting. And I would assume another variable that has an impact, at least among young drivers, is their GPA, because I know, like, for my kids, they have to submit their, when they first got insurance, they had to show their high school GPA, and these students are all our honor students, so they all have good GPAs. So does that mean that they'll be a slightly better driver than those with lower GPAs?
Well, it's I would say yes. I mean that somebody who's on the honor roll is probably going to be able to get some credit on the family policy, because presumably if they're better students, or they're getting better grades, or paying more attention, and they're the insurance companies are trying to reflect that. And the insurance companies, when you think about it, are trying to get every competitive advantage they can to beat every other insurance company. So if they can identify a variable that's more predictive, that is more impactful than any of their competitors, they'll win. They'll beat them until those other insurance companies, identify that as something similar.
Yeah, interesting. I remember when I was talking to Peter when we were getting the predictive analytics stuff going, he was saying, "I want all the data. Give me all of it." He said because he found something like magazine choice was a predictor of something, of risk, some form of risk, and I was like, "Wow, who knew?"
Well, yeah, and I mean, think about it from a life insurance perspective or health insurance perspective. If you were to go through and you can buy data sets that that can identify every single magazine that you subscribe to. So if you subscribe to Field and Stream and Runner's World and things like that, Eating Healthy, they know that, and they can use that versus somebody else who's writing something about snowmobiling or anything else that something that might be unhealthy. That's theoretically predictive, and so they can pull that data. Now it costs them to pull it, so is it worth the cost? And then you have to deal with the insurance department and say whether or not it's a valid variable to use. But they can pull all this information off each and every person that they want to.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So I'm going to turn it over to some of our students, and they have some interesting questions, and I made a note of them. And so Kiara, if you're on the line, you had a question for Mike. Did you want to ask that? Are you still on? Can't see.
Yeah, so my question was, what really made you realize that you wanted to be an actuary? Like, what caught your attention to actually go into that?
It's a good question. I've always liked math. I didn't always do well in math, and we probably don't have enough time to go, Paul's probably heard these stories, but, probably don't have enough time to go into all the history. But, when I was in college, and I went to a small liberal arts college in downstate Illinois, my father actually taught there. And so I was going through career services and just trying to figure out, what kind of job I could get. And I found brochures from, some of the larger insurance companies in the East Coast, Travelers and Aetna and companies like that talked about the actuarial profession. That was the first time I had ever heard of the word actuary. And I read about it and I thought, well, this would be pretty cool. And then it talked about, the type of background that they look for, which was heavy math. Well, I actually had failed calculus as a freshman. and didn't take any more math after that. So I just sort of set it aside and figured, well, I'll never get into an actuarial profession, into that profession. I graduated, was still trying to figure out what I was going to do and look for a job. My sister worked at an insurance company, and they had openings for actuaries. It was a small company, company you would never have heard of, and they needed actuaries, and so I interviewed for it, and I got it. I would say it was a bit easier back then to do it without exams. So the actuaries have an exam process that you have to go through. There's a series of exams that can be quite challenging. And the first one, interestingly enough, at the time was calculus, which I ultimately did pass. But it's my interest in doing math and trying to find an application for it, because when I was in school, I just struggled with the idea of, okay, well, I like math. What can you do with it? I could be a math teacher, but what are the other options out there? It was hard for me to, or a banker, but it was hard for me to even think through what other options there were. So.
Okay, good. Marissa, you had a similar question. Marissa, you want to ask your question?
Sure. My question was honest. It was like more about becoming an actuary. Like, when I was doing research, it said like there were some like 10 exams that you had to pass. And so I was wondering like how many attempts or just how difficult. I've heard it's a very difficult process.
Yeah, so in the number of exams kind of varies. It varied throughout my career, but yeah, if there's basically 10 exams, there might be 9. There might be some sub exams, like one exam might be split into a couple of different parts, but basically there's 10 exams. They are challenging, and they grade on a curve. Typically each exam, they're going to pass 35% of the people who take the exam, give or take. It's not always 35, it might be 30, it might be 40, but generally you're going to sit for an exam. It's offered twice a year. The upper exams are offered once a year, and you're competing against everyone else sitting for that exam in the country, and it can be quite competitive. Now, given that, all the insurance companies that you would work for and the consulting firms give you study time. So when I was sitting for exams, I got 120 hours of study time. So basically 3 weeks equivalent worth of work time to actually every 6 months to actually study for my exam that the company paid for. And if I passed, I would get a raise and I would get a bonus. And, you'd think, for me, I always thought, well, I project out how much money I could make, if I pass them. I'd spend more time thinking about that than I would studying. But I never passed an exam on the first try. Most of the time it took me 2, maybe 3 attempts to pass an exam. But a lot of people will pass them on the first try. And you rip through those exams, and it can impact promotions. It can impact a lot, depending on the organization that you're working for. But pretty much everybody is going to give you study time, and everyone is going to give you compensation increases. And that's outside of the normal raise you might get inside the organization, because the companies value the actuaries and they're willing to pay for it because it's highly competitive.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Joshua, you had a question for Mike about what he likes about the job, right?
Oh, yes. So, what stands out about your job, or what do you enjoy doing the most? in your profession?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm going to talk about it from my time at Deloitte, because and then I may talk a little bit about, because I worked at two insurance companies prior to coming to Deloitte. The thing I like most about working with Deloitte, and I would say it's split equally, it's working with the people, the people, you know, at Deloitte, and the teams that I work with that are the other actuaries, right? That are either my peers or more junior. And the reason why I enjoy that so much is they're incredibly bright. And I would say the people who work for me are better than me, and certainly better than me at any of the math stuff. I mean, they're all engaged. They're all really good. And if you're in an environment like that, any work environment where people are really good around you, it just makes it that much more fun. The other thing I like, you know, the other half of that is working with my clients. Clients really value what I do, and they really care. So, you know, yesterday morning I presented to the audit committee of part of the board of an insurance company that I do work for, and I've been doing work for them for 18 years. And every year I meet with this organization, and I spoke for 30 minutes and talked about, you know, the results we had come up with and what my thoughts were around their business and how it compared with what I'm seeing elsewhere at other companies, and trying to provide that insight. But, you know, working with, you know, the clients, I just find wonderful. And it's something that I didn't find as much of, or I didn't really find, you know, when it's something that really added when I came to consulting. Because when I worked in an insurance company, you know, you're interacting with, you know, the people, you know, that sit next to you, or, you know, maybe the department head or something like that. And yeah, it's okay, but I just found this environment much more interesting from my perspective. So, you know, and I don't view myself as an extrovert, but, you know, if we talk about, you know, the results of something and talking about it from a work perspective, I can generally interact with clients, you know, and try to explain it to them in layman's terms, and, you know, develop a really good relationship with them. And that really pays off down the road.
Thank you.
Who do you typically interact with among your clients?
Yeah, so insurance companies, typically at my level, the chief actuary, or the CFO, occasionally the CEO, but it's more that my involvement is more on the financial side, obviously, given all the numbers and everything. So I'm interacting more with the accounting folks and the actuarial departments, and providing that perspective. But there are times where I'm meeting with the CEO or people like the audit committees of organizations and boards of organizations. Now, my staff, who they're working with their counterparts, you know, at a lower level at the companies. So they're pulling data, they're asking for data, they're reviewing data, they're identifying, you know, data sets inherently are messy. There's just bad data in the data set. And so you've got to go through and you've got to try to clean that up. You've got to understand, you know, if it looks odd, why is it odd? Is it because there was a coding error? Is it because of whatever? But you've got to go through and spend time trying to clean up the data. And then you use that data to develop the models to come up with what you ultimately believe the end numbers are. And so, you know, it's incorporating those models, but it's working with, you know, generally your counterparts at you know, your client organizations. Now, that would be for an insurance company. For a self-insured organization, so corporation, or a public entity or something like that, typically it would be the risk manager, who oversees basically the insurance operations of that organization. So whether it's workers' comp, general liability, commercial auto, you think about Amazon, all those delivery trucks, all the planes, all the, the people that work for Amazon, what is their exposure? So you have somebody overseeing that entire insurance exposure. Those are the, that's who I would work for. So it would be comparable with maybe the CFO of an insurance company, because that person is operating as effectively the CFO from the insurance operation of the company itself, like Amazon.
Okay. Savannah, you want to ask your question?
Yeah, my question was, how do you advance in your sector or overall in the profession, and how demanding is it?
Yeah, so exams certainly helps, and it's hard to, you can certainly get promoted without necessarily passing a specific exam, and just because you pass an exam doesn't mean you be promoted. But ultimately, when you get to a more senior level, you want to pretty much be done with exams. So having those exams certainly helps. It's the ability of, I would say, trying to think about how you can, looking at the people who are above you in whatever projects you're working on, and how you can help them do their job, and look for opportunities to play that role, be in that role, take more and more responsibility, letting them go off and doing other things, which ultimately then allows them more success, but it allows you to be successful and ultimately, progress onto those types of roles. It's being proactive, helping out, and some of the stuff, can be quite mundane and boring. Not everything in a job is great, but you've got to get it done. And so, being willing to help out and being willing to, do whatever you can to make sure that whatever you're working on is successful, that will help make you successful.
Thank you.
Sure.
Ryan, you want to ask your question?
Yeah, while you were explaining what you did, I actually thought of another one too. So now I have two questions.
Okay.
Okay.
So the first one was, my original question was how often you're wrong, but I think a more appropriate question would be how often companies aren't happy with your assessment.
Well, I'm always wrong.
If ever.
Because one thing I know is whatever number I ultimately come up with, it's not going to be right. Because there's so many judgments and so many estimations. Sort of like a weather person. They've got all these models and they do all these things, but they're never right. The hope is that we get close. But how often are how often do companies not like when I have? I would say it's not often. It has happened. I basically put companies into bankruptcy because of, they didn't have enough set aside to pay the claims. And, it takes a lot to be willing to step out and say, you're wrong. But it's part of the job. And, in my career, and I've been at this firm for 29 years, you know, I would say less than one a year am I running into significant situations. You know, but you know, if I'm going to put them in that position or something like that, I'd better be right, because if I'm not, then we'll be sued, and that's a bigger deal. So, you know, you want to make sure, and you know, if I'm going to say something like that, I'm going to pull somebody else in to look over every single thing that I did or that our team did, and make sure that we're not missing something, because if we are, we want to catch it. But if we're not, then I've got, you know, a second person that helps, you know, make me more comfortable in positioning that. So, you know, it's not often, but I have done things like that. Now, a company might not like what I come up with, you know, but, you know, they may agree, they may adjust for it, or they may change their numbers for it. You know, it might be something where, you know, so if I were to work for an insurance company, so I ran into a situation a while back where a company was writing professional liability for long-term care facilities. So the exposure is if somebody, you know, an elderly person falls out of bed and breaks their hip or something. Well, you know, if you drive down the expressways, there are billboards all over the place, at least around here, and I know in Florida, that say, you've been injured in a nursing home, you know, call, you know, this lawyer, call me, I'm a lawyer, I'll get you money. Well, that's been a real problem for, you know, nursing homes and long-term care facilities. So I had a company that was starting to write that, and they really didn't have an understanding of what that exposure is. And, you know, they had put up, you know, they were writing maybe, let's say they started writing, you know, $20 million of premium a year, and they'd been in for maybe 5 years. It finally got to a big enough exposure that we incorporated that into the scope of our work. Now, it's one line of business out of maybe 100 that we're looking at for the company, but they weren't paying any attention to it. And we came in and said, we thought they were short by $150 million. And they didn't agree. Well, they said they'd start taking a look at it. Now, it didn't impact their overall results, because it's just one line out of a much larger organization, but it was an area that we disagreed on. In that case, I was probably closer to right than they were. But there are times where we disagree on a specific piece, but on an overall basis, we can come to an agreement. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's perfect. I just thought that was super interesting, because you're working with lots of money. So thank you. And my second question was, let's just say, because like an auto insurance company, because you said, like, if someone finds an indicator that is a lot stronger than other indicators, they're ahead of the game. What's the like confidentiality agreements like for when you're working with those kind of companies? Like, is it who's coming up with the indicators, and then like how like classified are they? If that makes sense.
Yeah, so we would have agreements with all of our clients as part of the contract that we would sign, that we're not going to be, you know, sharing specific data around that. It's an interesting question, because I would then have knowledge of a specific variable that is being used by company A. Could I take that to company B? If I did the work and I was coming up with it, I could, while I wouldn't necessarily say that that's the variable to use, I could pull company B's data sets that would include that variable, and then derive the same observation, if indeed it helped. And that's not telling the client what company A did, it's using the work and the insights that I've gained from working with company A. I'm allowed to use the knowledge that I've gained from one client and share it with another. But it's just how I go about it that you have to be careful about.
Awesome. Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Caesar, do you have a question?
Yes, I was gonna ask, since you had mentioned how actuaries actually, it's not just like it's one certain corporation, they could be part of like health, they could be insurance. So when you work in that, do you have to like specialize in a certain company, or as being an actuary, are you still able to move back and forth from different ones?
So, so back and forth between different professions. Is that what you're asking? So,
yes.
So it's not that common. Now, what we've been trying to do at Deloitte is hiring somebody who wants to be an actuary and being rather agnostic to it, with the idea of within the first, say 2 years of that individual's experience at Deloitte, that they may work on property casualty, they may work on health, probably, maybe a third, but probably not all four, and get some experience in each one. And then, solicit their feedback around which type of, actuary they want to be. And then also, look at the, where the fit is within the, the various departments we have. So it gives them some flexibility. Now that's actually played out pretty well from a recruiting perspective. Now insurance companies do rotational programs, but generally most insurance companies would go between different departments, but not be changing the field. So they wouldn't go from life to health because they're not writing both businesses. Some companies do write multiples, but most don't. They're writing property casualty or life insurance or something like that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, what advice, Mike, would you give a college student or a recent graduate who's seeking a career in becoming an actuary, or maybe trying to get into a role within a company like Deloitte?
Yeah, so I would say, thinking about an internship while you're in college. And this is in a perfect world. I mean, when I was going through college, there really weren't internships at the time, so that wasn't even an option really. But now, a lot of people that we're bringing that are college grads, they've had one, if not two, internships. So between their sophomore and junior year and junior and senior year. Doesn't have to be the same company. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's us. But having some sort of experience in the field of, I think is very helpful, particularly to get into a large organization like Deloitte. Now, I would say it's probably less important if you were to start at a smaller company. And again, I never would have gotten into Deloitte. I never would have gotten into the Hartford or, Allstate or anything like that coming out of college, just because I didn't have the background, I didn't have the exams. So, starting at a small company, once you get in, then no one cares about college. All you need is the first job in the field, and then you can go anywhere as long as your performance is good. And so in 2 jumps, I got to Deloitte. Actually, I was my first job was 2 years and 9 months. My second job was 2 years and 9 months, and I got to Deloitte, and I was thinking that I might never be able to go 3 years at any organization. And at 3 years, I wasn't even looking for a job because I liked it so much. But it's having an internship helps. A lot of actuarial candidates have one or more exams in college. So, if you're at all thinking about it, what I would do is go on to the actuarial websites. There's 2 different actuarial societies. There's the Casualty Actuarial Society, which I'm a part of, and there's a Society of Actuaries. You can read up on the exam process, look at the materials for the first couple of exams, and but I would encourage anyone who wants to be an actuary to try to take an exam, and hopefully get through 1 or 2 exams while they're in college, because most of the people you're going to be competing against will have already had that. Again, particularly at the larger companies. Now, I think you're on mute, Paul.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Do you guys have other questions for Mike? Well, we wrap things up. I know we're almost at about an hour here, so I know, Mike, you probably want to get home for dinner or
Whatever.
Yeah. What other questions do you guys have?
Just a quick one. Do you usually work on salary or on price per job or assessment like that?
It's so for most of our projects, we'll do a fixed fee. It's and then try to see how efficient we can be at it and still produce a quality work product. So I would say most of it is that way. Now, I have done projects that are hourly. I ran into a situation a year ago. So we had this company that was writing insurance for taxis, lemos, and they started writing Uber, and they ran into some financial difficulties, and they had their filings delayed. They were a public company, and they had their filings delayed because their auditors wouldn't sign off on their reserves, and we were brought in to do the work and to do some work to try to. Actually, their auditors resigned from the audit. They walked away from the company. The actuary quit. So we came in and we said we would come in and estimate what we thought the liability should be, but we wanted $500 an hour, no matter the level of person that we're working with. And our estimate, would start at, we think it would be maybe $200,000, and then ended up being $500,000 project. But it's, we were time constrained. We were, sort of all hands on deck, and they also needed, a firm that had a reputation and a good reputation, and they needed help, and they were willing to pay for it. So there are situations like that, and I just didn't know how long it would take. So I gave them an estimate, but I said, we'll just bill you by the hour, and they were fine with it. So
$500 an hour, that's more than the typical consultant rate, I would assume.
Right. Now my billing rate theoretically is like $1,200 an hour, but we never get that. But no, I mean, normally if we're pricing out, excluding India, so I can talk about that for a few minutes, but excluding India, we're probably getting $250 to $300 on a blended rate for projects and work that we're doing. So by blended rate, it means, my billing rate's higher than, say, a staff person, but I'm billing less time on it. And so you start to blend it all together, and you look at an estimate of the number of hours we would spend on it, and we're getting about $250 to $300 an hour. Now, if we throw U.S. India, because we've got an India operation, it's an offshoring operation. So you hear all about tech companies offshoring all this work to India. Deloitte has now, I don't know, 30,000 people in India that work for the U.S. firm. And, you know, their pay is considerably less. And so you get a cost advantage there, and you get to some extent a time advantage, because when we're not working, they're working. So if you can structure a project in such a way that you're shifting things back and forth, there's really an advantage to it. Easier said than done, but there's definitely a cost play there. And, you know, it allows us to lower our rate because our cost structure is cheaper. It allows us to lower our rate to be able to be more effective in the marketplace and be able to win more, because we're competing against companies that don't have the infrastructure, don't have necessarily the overhead that a company like ours would have. And so it can give us a competitive advantage.
Cool. How stressful is it to be an actuary?
I would say, if you work at a company, it's probably one of the best jobs in the world, and relatively low stress until you get into a senior position. Working in a consulting environment can be stressful because there's a lot of demands. There's you know, I'm not busy. I'm just coming out of busy season. I had a couple of calls today. I didn't really do much today. But you know, in October, I'm working 15, 16 hours a day, looking through documents, looking through results of analyses, things like that, trying to figure out where we go from there. It can be very stressful in consulting, but it's also, it's not 24/7 all year long. It's more seasonal in nature. And for me, because of my client mix that I have, I'm actually busier in September through December, and then January, February are busy for me personally. For my staff, it's very busy January and February as well. But for me, January and February is more difficult. My challenge is just trying to schedule meetings, because I'm traveling from, you know, Connecticut to Illinois to California to Washington to, you know, I'm just traveling all over to have these client in-person meetings. So it was fascinating this year in this remote environment. Actually, my last plane trip was coming home from Tampa last year tomorrow. So I haven't been out of Chicago for 1 year. But what I found this January and February was, you know, I can do three client meetings a day, all in different cities, because I'm not traveling anywhere. And so to some extent, it's made my life easier in January, February, but the fall was brutal for me. And then summer is quite enjoyable. So, yeah, so I like the ups and downs of it. You know, it's if you come out of what we call busy season, and, you know, you get excited and you feel energized by it, you know, it's kind of a really cool career. If you feel overburdened and overwhelmed, it's probably not a long-term career in consulting anyway. But actuaries and insurance companies, that's much more of a cyclical, you know, stable environment. There's not nearly as many of those types of ups and downs.
Yeah, I always remember it seems like the stress for the actuaries when you know, the ones that I was interacting with at Deloitte was just the younger ones were getting ready to pass their exams, you know, and trying to get over that hurdle. But I was always jealous of the actuaries, because I was on the, you know, the advisory services sort of thing, where we were always having to sell work, and, you know, you do it one and you never go back to the client again, you know, unless there's something else going on. There was no predictable work. So that was, you know, that was a whole different kind of stress, as you know, in the consulting world. Yeah. So that's great. So that's it. You guys, you just need to get through the tests and find yourself a nice cozy insurance company to nestle into, and you'll be set. There'll be high pay, low stress. Insurance companies seem to be doing okay. They always seem to do okay. Occasionally, I guess they don't. But it's not a bad industry to get involved in.
I would agree, and certainly if you have further questions or want to talk more about the profession or anything, I'm happy to have a conversation anytime. So one-on-one or in a group basis. For a while in my career, I would said, given how much time I spent taking the exams, because I would continue to fail them and then pass them. At some point during my career, I looked back and said, would I do it again? And I would have said no. As I look back on it now, and would I do it again? Oh yeah, I'd do it all over again. I mean, it's just been, for me, it's worked out really well, and I enjoy what I do. I'm happy in my career, and I've been very fortunate. So
yeah. Well, we're very fortunate that you took the time out to share all that with us, Mike. I really appreciate it. And the class, I guess you can give Mike a round of applause, either virtually or just. And I really appreciate it. So anything else that you guys? Anything else from the class? No. All right. Well, thank you again, Mike, and
Sure.
I really appreciate you taking the time out. And I'll send you a copy of the recording of this, so you can have it for your records. And I really appreciate you sharing all that you do.
all right. Well, thank you for having me.
Welcome.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you.
All right.
Take
Everybody, they're going on spring break, so y'all have a good break, and
Yes.
stay safe.
Thank you.
Enjoy.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.